The searchlights are in position. The guns are ready. The People's Army of Volunteers is ready. They are the ones who are really fighting this war. The firemen, the air raid wardens, the ambulance drivers. And there's the wail of the banshee. The nightly siege has begun.
The Sheffield Blitz, also known as Operation Crucible, took place over the nights of the 12th and 15th of December 1940. Sheffield was key in the British military supply chain during World War II. A city of about 560,000 people, Sheffield contained many heavy industries, primarily centred on steel and armaments. These industries played a pivotal role in the Allied war effort for the Second World War.
Sheffield's connection with armaments production has always been in the emphasis of high-quality products, high-quality armour-piercing projectiles, high-quality pieces of armour, and they carried on this ethos into the wartime. They're still producing these high-quality products, but in addition to this, they started to produce much greater numbers of shells for the war effort on the battlefields of Europe. This is much more widespread mass production compared to the specialised production of armaments as well. In addition to these armaments products, Sheffield is also producing bespoke metal products like the crankshafts for aeroplane engines. These are high quality products made from special steels developed in the interwar period, which are vitally important to producing things like Merlin aeroplane engines for Spitfires, one of the key deterrents against the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain.
I think one of the main things that Sheffield made were the crankshafts for the Spitfire engines. It was a key drop hammer that we had here in Sheffield, and apparently if that would have been wiped out, that would have significantly impeded, the kind of British fight back. But they were just making so many things, parts for planes, ships, tanks, just so kind of much, and you kind of forget that it was actually the women that were working in them, because the men were out fighting the war. So it was the kind of women of kind of Sheffield that were actually working, doing the shift to make all these happen. So there was just so many thousands of people employed in in these massive steelworks, armaments factories.
While Sheffield had a crucial role in steel production, it raises the question why steel in general was crucial to the Second World War.
The Second World War was the total war par excellence. It was the war where every bit of infrastructure mattered. Every single industry mattered. It was a war that would be won by our industry. One of the foremost industries, and this is common sense, one of the foremost industries would be steel. Central to armaments production, munitions production, central to the material of war. As such, it's obvious, it's clear that Sheffield would be targeted as being the centre of steel production. Steel was very important to the war, therefore it was a very important target.
Unbeknown to the people of Sheffield, the German Luftwaffe were about to unleash one of the most destructive and detrimental attacks on the city of Sheffield. At approximately 7:41 p.m, the German Pathfinder unit had arrived over the city and began to drop a number of high-explosive bombs and incendiaries over the city. This had a devastating effect, killing 660 people in total and making another 40,000 homeless.
It was a wrong picture. That's on Cambridge Street. It finished up as a theatre, that. But we turned out, because the manager got up on stage, there's air raid on that side, we've got to shut the place down, all of you out. Out onto the street, you just make for nearest underground shelter. It was no good being scared, you just found somewhere to go where it was safe. You know where Fitzallen Square is? There used to be a ladies' toilet down in the middle and the gents, and I went under there, because you were right under. It was pitch black dark, and they didn't have no lights on aeroplanes. They had a funny sound there, aeroplanes. They used to go boom, boom, boom. They used to come flying in. They called it dive bombing. They used to dive down on an object and just pull lever and bomb dropped onto it.
There was, before the war, a fear of the bomber. There was a fear that the bomber will always get through. And that motivated the government when war looked likely. Though war was being appeased, or the idea of war was being appeased and Germany being appeased, actually the government behind the scenes was preparing for war. One of the preparations they put in place was air raid precautions, set up in 1938 to plan for a large-scale bombing raid.
I think they were as prepared as anywhere, really. I think at that point we were ready for invasion. You know, houses were prepared. You know, all the kind of cellars had kind of, you know, structures to kind of shelter people from bombing, and, you know, air raid shelters, you know, were widespread and distributed. There was scores of public air raid shelters around the city. But I think in many respects you speak to a lot of people, and because there have been so many kind of air raid warnings and there not been actual bombings, a lot of people have become very blasé about the air raid warnings, and a lot of people, I've spoken to scores of people, said, you know, we were sick of paying our money going to the cinema. The air raid warning would go off halfway through the film, we'd leave, the air raid attack wouldn't come, we'd wasted that money, and a lot of people just said, you know, we're just going to stay, you know, we're going to watch our film. And I think this is one of the first times that, you know, the air raid warnings went off at 7. Within a few minutes they heard the sound of anti-aircraft fire, British guns, you know, which had not really been heard before, because, you know, this was the real thing. But generally people were prepared, but say they were quite blasé because there'd been just so many false alarms over the months.
You used to ignore them. You were in Picture Palace and you used to shut film off. While manager got on, sirens have gone, you can stay in if you like, but if you want to go, you can go.
When we look at, for instance, northern cities, those cities tended to be hit in short waves, but they tended to be hit very heavily. And what we find is that the damage is extensive. Physical damage is extensive. But actually, that doesn't have the desired effect. The Luftwaffe's campaign is not as successful as they want it to be in that sense. Simply because within 2 or 3 months at maximum, and often quite a lot quicker, the cities are rebuilt. What is more difficult to calculate is the mental effects. The effects on the everyday person. Living under fear. Even if that campaign was only a few days, even if it was the isolated bomb rather than the day upon day, night upon night bombing campaigns of London, that fear was always there. Those memories were always there. So though physical effects could be got over quite quickly, and I suppose this is the aim of terror bombing, the aim of bombing civilians, the psychological effects last much longer.
You just, 1 or 2 workmates got killed, and, you know, when it was Blitz, anybody got killed. Houses were knocked over like all streets, boom, gone.
The city centre was very badly hit. Obviously, city centre, you know, there's not a lot of people, you know, loads of the key department stores were all razed to the ground, like the mall was totally decimated. But in terms of civilian population, Devonshire Green, if you know where Devonshire Green is now, the big park, that was a big community, back-to-back housing. There was a big mass casualties on there. That was one of the biggest losses of life, even though there was around over 2,000 people killed or wounded.
Okay, so this area here, Sheffield's Barker's Pool, was hit in the Second World War bombings, and buildings like Sheffield City Hall still have the marks and damage from the shrapnel exploding in this area. Whereas if you look around the back of these pillars, you can see there's no damage. If you think about the connection between
Nazi Germany and Sheffield, and even if we go all the way to the top of the Nazi regime with Adolf Hitler, you start to ask questions: how much does he know about Sheffield? How much does he know about the industry? It's hard to tell, but probably quite a bit because of his connections to the German arms company of Krupp's. Krupp's is the biggest German arms company going all the way back to before the First World War. When Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany and wants to rearm the country, he goes to Krupp's. They start producing war materials again. The head of Krupp's had technological agreements with industry in Sheffield, especially from the First World War. They know what the industry is like in this area. How much Hitler said, go bomb Sheffield, there's industry there, is hard to substantiate.
The Germans had a much better understanding than we think of our industry. What mattered, where mattered. Throughout the 1930s, a lot of reconnaissance had been done. They had, and these have only recently come to light, clear pictures, reconnaissance pictures of all the major industrial centres. So they knew what was being produced where. And of course, they knew what was important. It was important to them too.
If we follow the ideas of a historian like Ian Kershaw, that the Nazi government is forever working towards the Führer, working towards what they believe Adolf Hitler will want, then there must certainly be decisions made that say Hitler wants us to bomb an industrial centre like Sheffield. This is seen as important to the British war machine. So we can come to the conclusion that Hitler may not have had a direct decision in saying this, but certainly it was influenced by him.
There has been much debate over whether the brutal attacks on the 12th and 15th of December were primarily a terror raid on the people of Sheffield or an attack on the city's steelworks.
Certainly my months, probably years of kind of researching, talking to scores of people and things, it's definitely, I certainly would go with the theory that it was more of a terror raid to actually terrorise the people of Sheffield. Just knowing the bombing they've done on other places, and I think the sheer size of these armaments factories, and kind of the big massive cluster down the East End, and the fact that they didn't knock one of those out significantly when I do think they had the capacity to, leads me to the theory that it was more of a terror raid.
While some historians view the Sheffield Blitz as a straightforward terror attack on the city, others express differing opinions.
Sheffield was a target because of its industrial heritage, because it was the centre of steel production in the country. There is no doubt about that. If you look at targets across the country, first and foremost, areas were targeted for industrial or infrastructure reasons. So undoubtedly Sheffield was picked out to be bombed because of its steel heritage. Doesn't mean it was the only reason. It doesn't mean it was the only reason for why you would target a particular place. The fact it was a large city made it a target. The fact that it was a large civilian population made it a target. But first and foremost, the industry, the infrastructure mattered.
A crucial piece of evidence has been discovered at the Sheffield Local Archive, which has added weight to the view that the German bombing campaign was primarily an attack on the city's steelworks.
So what we have here is a map from the German archives which was used to plan the bombing raids on the first and second night in Sheffield. The targets we see in red were targets for the first night and are principally civilian targets. The targets in purple here are principally industry, and they were targets primarily for the second night. If we look at the red targets, we have things like transport. So we have the Midland Railway Station, Victoria Railway Station, so people can't move around in Sheffield afterwards. We have the town hall targeted, so you can take away the ability of local government. We have hospitals targeted, so people can't actually get care if they are injured in the bombing raids. These are things to essentially stop the people of Sheffield moving around, working, getting care. The purple targets, so we have here around Kelham Island, a cluster of cutlery works. We have the Atlas steelworks here, which was John Brown's and Thomas Firth's. We have the gun works here, producing weaponry. This is all purple and target for a second night.
Even just looking at this first map of the centre of Sheffield, we can see there are far more purple targets, far more steelworks targeted than civilian targets. And visually, the steelwork targets look different on the map to the centre of Sheffield. This densely packed area of buildings and people living, people working, people entertaining themselves. It looks different to the steelworks, and it would have looked different from the air for these pilots flying on those clear nights of the Blitz. If we take a look at the second map, which is further out to the northeast of Sheffield, where more steelworks are, we can see more targets are purple. In fact, this is principally purple targets here. We have the East Heckler Works of Hadfield, which is where modern-day Meadowhall is. We have the Imperial Steel Works, which was Edgar Allen's. Tinsley Steel Works, which was stainless steel produced by Firth Vickers. And here we have the Vickers River Don Works, which is the modern-day Sheffield Forge Masters. All of these purple targets here are steelworks that were targeted on the second night. After the end of the First World War, Sheffield was well known across the world as the world's centre of armaments production and armaments technology. And this was not something lost on Germany. The Nazi government knew that Sheffield was an important production centre and important for the technology of armaments which would support the British war effort. This leads into why Sheffield was targeted during the Battle of Britain with the Blitz. My take on this has always been that the first night was a terror raid. You terrify the people of Sheffield into believing that they could be targeted in their homes, you take away their morale, and you make them realise that they are legitimate targets in this total war. However, for the second night of bombing, it is much more targeted. It is about hitting the industrial capacity, taking away Sheffield and Britain's ability to produce those high-quality weapons, those high-quality steel products, and to continue to support trying to defeat the Nazi government. My take on this has always been it's a story of two halves, depending on which night of the Blitz you look at. It is partly about terror, but it is also partly about a targeted strike on these steelworks, on this important industrial capacity for Britain.
Where I lived, just off Peter Street, they brought works down Pittsmore there, down Carlisle Street and all that. All these big steel works, that's what they were after. If they'd have got rid of Sheffield Steel Works, war would have been over. Because we wouldn't have been able to make no bloody fuel or all.
Despite the steelworks of the city being a main target of the German bombing campaign, the effects of the Blitz on the everyday person can still not be understated. For the people of Sheffield, the memory of those who have been lost will always be poignant.
You don't want to remember it. It's not nice to remember. It weren't funny, it was bloody awful. You used to make a laugh on it, but it weren't funny. When I took Blitz, there were bombs dropping everywhere. It were a funny time. You didn't know whether you'd be there tomorrow or not. So you made best on it.